Good afternoon, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started here on the fall MIP Lunch and Learn. I see many people still joining here, so we'll kind of run through some housekeeping items before we get to the main topic. So this is Luke Lothamer speaking. I'll be presenting this afternoon. We're happy that you're all able to join us. If anybody's having any issues, please call Leah Peters at the phone number there on the screen at the bottom. If you're having any issues at all, please give her a call. If anybody would like to receive CPE for today's Lunch and Learn, also could you email Leah at her email address and just put in the subject line of the email that it's for CPE credit. Many of you may have attended a past Lunch and Learn or user group, so you're familiar with how the questions will go. So we do allow for questions to be submitted via the chat box on your screen. We will not be opening phone lines for live questions. We hope to get to your questions at different pauses within the presentation. If we don't get to all of the questions, we will certainly follow up with each one afterwards. On today's agenda, we're going to start off with introductions. I'm then going to jump into MIP imports and how each one of you can create them on your own. We'll also talk about how closing your fiscal year might affect your balance sheet. I'll show you your financial reports and how you can drill down into the detail, maybe a different way that you have seen previously. And then last but not least, we'll talk about resources. If you should get stuck or have issues, where can you go for help? As always, you can always come to get help from one of us there on the screen. So again, I'm Luke Lothamer and Adam West Curtis. Both of us have worked with MIP for many years, so we can help you in many different ways. If you want to shoot us an email or give us a call at either email address or number on the screen there. For those of you who might not have joined us or worked with us in the past, we are DWD Technology Group. We're a division of a CPA firm, Doolin, Ward and DeWalt, established in 1939, located in Fort Wayne, Indiana, right there in the northeast corner, and we are made up of right around 90 staff. The tech group in particular, made up mostly of software consultants and network engineers. Many of us on the software consulting side are CPAs. We have been included in Accounting Today Top 100 VARs, as well as Bob Scott's Top 100 VARs as well. We do offer help with many different solutions. Many of you are familiar with MIP. You might have also heard of Sage. Sage offers a vast variety of platforms and solutions. So anywhere from Sage 100, Sage 50, which used to be known as Peachtree, Sage Fixed Assets, Sage CRM, HRMS. The big one here that I've kind of mentioned on past Lunch and Learns and user groups is Sage Intacct. That's similar to, or I should say the most similar to MIP. And we've seen many of our MIP client base move to Sage Intacct. It has a broader range of modules, and it is cloud-based. So you log in from your browser. There's no RDP logging in and a connection established. It's all through your browser, so all you need is an internet connection. I'm going to jump into that solution here. You can see this in the slide deck. This is a picture of their dashboard. But when you log into Sage Intacct, let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. I'm going to show you this temporarily here. Any of you who feel like you're growing out of MIP, or maybe MIP's not quite keeping up with your needs, Sage Intacct is a great option for you. And there's many different options. You can see the modules that I have turned on in this demo environment. If any of these kind of stick out, or you want to know more information on what Intacct has to offer, let Adam or I know. Dashboards are the big part of it. Everybody loves how these look and what can be included. You have different dashboards based on position type, or you can have completely customized to each user's needs. So if I jump to the CFO dashboard here, it changes. You've got different panels. You'll notice the charts and graphs to load. Lots of information to unpack here. But if you had purchases that needed to be approved as the CFO here, you can see those that have been submitted, or if they require your approval. You've got different charts and graphs. You've got a revenue trend report with color-coded values. As I scroll down here, you've got operating ratios as an option, and then we kind of get down to your expenditure report. Many of these you can drill down into the values. So like we want to look at professional fees here. I can click on that value. It then shows my general ledger report with the detail behind each of those accounts. And then I can take it one step further. So I can drill into that entry in particular. Once this loads, if you had attachments tied to it and you wanted to see what those might be, you could go to that level of detail. This shows us the entry and what accounts it's booking to, and then you can venture back to where we were to the report, close this out, and then you're back to your dashboard. So great option. It uses a table-driven chart of accounts, similar to what each of you are used to with MIP. So where you have segments for program, grant, fund, project, whatever it may be, Sage Intacct uses the same logic, and you can set it up in that similar fashion. So any interest at all, feel free to reach out to us. And I'm going to make my way back to our slide deck here. One more housekeeping item here. We do offer network services here at DWD Technology Group. If you're also interested in a managed IT security plan, data backup services, Microsoft Office 365, or managed IT services, let us know on that as well, and we can get you in touch with the right individual. All right, so our primary topic, our first topic here this afternoon, we're going to talk about MIP imports. Some of you may use imports in MIP today. We might have even created those for you. We're going to show you the inner workings behind that and how easy it is to create your own. So I'll kind of get into the details and the weeds here in a minute. Before I get into the software, I wanted to mention, what can be imported. So just so you're all familiar, you've got a variety of AP imports that can be created. You can import invoices, credits, manual checks. You can import AR invoices, AR credits, AR receipts that tie back to the invoices. To the right, we've got our bank rec cleared items. So you might wonder, well, what's that mean? If you have a large bank rec and maybe you download your bank statement with the items that clear for a given month, you can load what's on that statement into MIP and it'll automatically check those boxes to help in reconciling your bank rec. Budgets, you can import those, cash disbursements, cash receipts, encumbrances. I'll jump back to cash receipts. We see many organizations who might be using like donor software or any type of where you're receiving money in and it's tracked in a different system. We see many organizations using a cash receipt import to load those from that other software into MIP. And then last but not least, we have journal vouchers. So journal vouchers, maybe you have a payroll entry that you're doing each month that's super long. We help many organizations trim the amount of time they're spending on that, so you could export that detail from your payroll provider into an Excel file, and then we would help you create the import process to load it automatically as opposed to you manually keying it. So I'm going to jump into a very general import, and then you can always look into these other types as you see fit. What is needed for an import? So with MIP, if you're not familiar with the import process, you need to have an Excel file with your data. You also need to have a definition file, which is typically opened in Notepad, and it almost looks like a foreign language if you've looked at the definition file before, but I'm hopefully going to make a little more sense to you all on what is included in that file today. So we'll look at both of these files as a part of our Lunch and Learn. And then if I jump to my next slides before I get into the software itself, there's the Excel file. There's the definition file. Like I said, it kind of looks like a different language if you're not sure what you're looking at there. All right, and let me go ahead and I will pull up the software. There's my MIP database. And then we'll look at each of the files. So one thing I wanted to mention as well, if you want another resource for imports, I would always guide, and I'll kind of pick this up towards the end of our Lunch and Learn today too. This help menu, jump down to product guides. That's going to open up a tab in an internet browser. And then if I come down to the data import export, this product guide is going to have all the information you need to build and import on your own. So this really does lay out all of the information needed, and I even refer to it myself sometimes when I haven't done a certain process in quite some time. I'll come back out to this product guide and reference it to get things exactly as they should be. So if you're not familiar with that help, product guides, you can go to the data import export product guide from there. All right, so let's start with the Excel file itself. My example here is going to be a payroll import. So my file, I've got it titled payroll import template. And then we have our various columns here that I'm going to run through left to right. Years may vary. There's a few things we can do to change things around. That's why we would always say check with your payroll provider as to how they can export the information before you define what this layout should be, because you have a little bit of flexibility as to how things can look and feel. Starting off with column A, we've got voucher number. This, from a payroll perspective, could be self-defined. I'm just saying, okay, we've got a pay cycle 10/18/2024. I'm going to call that or use that as my voucher number. And then I've copied it all the way down. So one thing to note here on the voucher number or document number, if you're looking to import AP bills, anytime this document number changes, the system's going to see it as unique documents. So what you want to make sure of is if you have one document or you have many, they all need to balance debits and credits, and they may need to balance by, if you have a fund or a grant segment where it is balancing, they'll have to balance by that. Otherwise, you're going to run into issues. So one thing I always check is, in my case, I am importing one payroll file here, so one entry. I just hover over debits, look at my value at the bottom, the sum, which is $442,552.42, and just double check to make sure that my credit column sums to that same value, in which it does. So you could still potentially run into an issue if your balancing segment doesn't balance, but at least we know our file in total balances debits and credits. Next up, we have our document description. This is going to be, and I'll show you because I'm more of a visual person myself. We will start a new session. And then let's just go ahead and I'll use the same voucher number that I just referred to, in this case, pay cycle 10/18/2024. The document description that I'm pointing out in the Excel file is going to go here when imported. So it's going to be the header description and not the transaction description. Okay, so jumping back to my Excel file to reference the data, column B is the document, so the header one. So I want to refer to the payroll in total and not really the detail beneath it. So that I'm going to keep the same all the way through. And then the next column to the right is our transaction description. Transaction description refers to this one here down in the transaction grid. That description could be by employee. So when you export from your payroll provider, these rows may have names associated with it. So maybe I want this row to reference Luke, this one to reference Adam, this one to reference Sherry, and so forth. That's where you might want to have that detail broken out. And so you can accommodate that description in this column here. Effective date, I have one date here as to when it's going to be posted to the GL. So I know that my pay date's 10/18. That's when I want that to be posted. If you come back into MIP, you'll notice we actually have two dates, or three if you include session date. So session date, document date, and effective date. I'm only spelling out one date because I want those three dates to be the same. All right. You might have examples of imports where maybe the document date's different from the effective date. It's, I would say, super rare, but it does happen. So you could have two columns or three for each of the dates: session date, document date, and effective date. I would say keep it simple if possible. Just it's one less thing that you need to define here in your Excel file. I'm accommodating this one column for all three dates and using it for all three. All right. Now I get into my segments. So if I look at this column as well as these to the right, I've got my GL account that I'm spelling out for my payroll entry. If you look at the account codes, if it's payroll, you're going to have some cash lines, some liabilities, expenses, depending on benefits, salaries, wages, and then the overall cash effect. In my database, grant is a balancing segment. So I have to define that for each row, even the balance sheet accounts. You want to make sure you do the same for any balancing segment in your database. And then I have program and department here that you can see it's not required for balance sheet accounts, but is for our expense lines down below. And then last but not least, we get our debits and credits to the right of that. All right, so this here is usually the easy part to an extent. This data makes sense. This is what we want to then flow into MIP. The part that takes a little bit of setup or configuration is the definition file. The definition file tells this data where it needs to go in MIP. So how I've kind of been going left to right here and specifying where that data goes in this entry, that's what your definition file is going to do. All right, so I'm going to pull up my Excel file and kind of have my notepad off to the right of it so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. This is the part that I said it earlier. It kind of looks like a foreign language, but hopefully I'll make more sense of it so that it's not as intimidating to build out on your own. So I'll kind of start here, break it apart in sections as it's meant to be. So the system is looking at these rows here. Anything that you see that starts with REM, comma, that's just basically telling the system to ignore those rows. So anything with REM, comma, system isn't even looking at. It's just for your reference. This here is telling me we're going to be importing a session from our file. And then down below, the ones I'm going to point out here that are important for our records is discard first records. So essentially this one's saying if you have titles or headers, that's not important to the import. You don't want those to be imported into MIP. So it's saying, all right, remove the first row. If you had more than one header row, you could say remove the first 2, 3, however many rows till you get to the actual data. That's going to be an important one right there. This one that is being ignored in this definition file, this is apply offsets. So if you were, let's say, for instance, AP invoices that you know need to be offset to your AP account, if you have that enabled, you could then define just the rows that are expense related, and then the system would apply the offsets automatically. So you're not having to define both sides of each entry. Hopefully that makes sense. You're just defining, in most cases, the debit side of the entry, and then the system upon import is applying the credit for AP invoices, that is. I turned this off because in a payroll entry, the offset may be different and it's not going to usually automatically apply. So we have that turned off in this case. You can have different types of files. So some organizations may use a text file to import. I'd say 90%, if not higher, using this Excel CSV file. So it's not using a long string, it's using the segments. So that's kind of what this is saying here. Look at the segments and not one long string and parse it out. All right, so I'm going to scroll down and you're going to notice the next section I get to here is session information import. And if I pull up MIP, your session information is going to be defined when you create your actual session. So I'm going to go back into journal vouchers. Right here, that section in my definition file will define what values go in here. Okay. Important starting point. And I'm going to run through this here. So your session ID, many of you, maybe you key in the session ID. Some of you might hit the plus key, which auto numbers the next one in line. What I'm doing in my case today is I'm telling it to auto number. So if I look at this row in my definition file, auto number based on the next one in sequence. Therefore, I don't have to spell it out in my Excel file. Okay. The status, many of you may have not ever changed this or even known what that even means because it usually populates BP, which is batch to post. And in my file here, I'm saying default that value to BP. The other options are batch to suspend or online posting. I'd say most commonly we do see BP. Okay. Next up, your description. I have hard-coded a session description here. You could always include this in your Excel file if you wanted to define that yourself. I just titled it payroll import. So anytime I use this, what's going to go in that description field is payroll import. And then the session date that's going to be used is going to be in my file. So what you'll want to look at here is that 3 references the column in my Excel file. So if we go back here, 1, 2, 3, and my date is actually off there, so it needs to be 4. So we need to use column D, number 4, in our file. So you would want to come in, update that to column 4 so that it uses the correct column when importing. If I had left that as 3, our file would have errored out and said, that's not in the date format that you've defined here, and it wouldn't know what to do. So there's always a chance for errors, which we'll kind of talk about here in a little bit, that you might have to troubleshoot, but that one's an easy one, just making sure you're looking at the right column in this case. Okay. One other row that I'll point out might be important to you if you start to dabble in imports on your own. The transaction source ID here that I've hard-coded, I'm using JV for my payroll import. Just know that that would need to be changed depending on what type of transaction you're looking to import. So it could be API for AP invoices, could be AR ARP, ARM, depending on the AR type of transaction. So keep that in mind if you're looking to create your own and change it from a JV transaction. All right, so once we define the session, let's go ahead and do that again. All right, we've input that. When we get to the document, the voucher number, like what I had in there before, 10/18/2024, now we're looking at these values for the next section. So the document header information here that I'm highlighting refers to the upper portion, or in my case, the yellow fields shown at the top. Okay, you'll notice that this section does reference the session again. We would leave this as auto number in my case because we are auto numbering the session. Transaction source is JV, so that stays the same. And then we get to our document number. So again, the value after the comma to the right references the column in your Excel file. So let me go ahead and pull that back up. In our case, document number is going to be column 1, so that's our voucher. You'll want to make sure that this always uses the TEDoc_docnum and doesn't reference the column header. This column header in your Excel file can be anything. You can call it AP invoice, you can call it voucher, you can call it whatever. You just want to make sure that this is always referencing that in this case. So we've got column 1 as our document number. Column 2, again, description. Be leery of this because we're referencing the header section. That's going to be your document description, which we do know that that's column 2 in my import here. Okay. Many of these others down below, you're going to notice that it has REM to the left of it. That means I am ignoring it in this import in particular. Just for your information, this would be if I was referencing a customer or vendor, depending on if it's AP or AR. Player ID is going to be vendor ID or customer ID. Player type is going to be V or C, depending on vendor customer. And then if you wanted to track 1099 type, that would be used for your AP vendors as well. So in my payroll import, I'm ignoring all 3 of those, which brings me to our document date. Document date's going to be that at the top of the screen. You might remember that I, in my import, used the same date for all 3 date fields. So you'll notice that that needs to be changed as well. So I had that as 3. That needs to be 4. And then that same as above references the format in which the date is going to be found in our import. The remaining rows in the header information here, I am ignoring as well. Those would apply to AP or AR imports. If you had due date, miscellaneous info, if it was an accrual entry, that might be helpful. You might have a reversal as well as a reversal effective date to be used. My case here, I'm not using it for accrual purposes, but I could. Okay. So that there is the document header information in the entry. Again, that's the top portion of our journal entry. And last but not least, we're going to get into the transaction grid down below. So back to my Excel file, back to my definition file. And this is our last section of the definition. You're going to notice that it does reference the session ID. One more time, I'm still saying that it's going to be auto-numbered. It references the document number, which we define in column 1. Our description for the transaction description, that's going to be in column 3. The entry type, which many of you may not have changed unless you did an adjusting entry or an entry into a closed fiscal year. This is being defaulted in mine to a normal entry. I would say 99.9% of the time, if not higher, I always use normal entry in an import process. Only if you were trying to do an adjusting import would you change that value. Okay, and again, we've got our effective date, which I do have defined as column 4 here. And then we get into our segments. This is going to be unique to your organization. So if you're using my definition file here, don't copy this part because this is going to be unique to you. You might have some of the same, but not all. So in my case, if we look at my MIP database, go to organization information, and then my segments. All of you can go out here in your, as long as you have permissions to see it. These are the segments that you have in your organization. For me, I have fund, grant, GL, program, department, and restriction. What that means is for each of the revenue and expense accounts, typically we would have all of these coded. And then for balance sheet accounts, you must have GL, obviously, a fund, if you have a fund segment, and then anything that's considered balancing. So in my case, I have to have 1, 2, and 3 coded in my import. So I'm going to start from the top here, work my way down. If we look at my import definition file, as a part of the import, you can default values. So let's say like restriction or fund is always going to be the same as far as import goes. I'm defaulting fund 01, which happens to be the operating fund here. That's going to be used for everything in my entry. How that helps you is that's one less column that you need to code. So you'll notice that I don't have a column here for fund. So that's because it's defaulting the value for each row within my entry. If we look at GL, GL is going to be in column 5. So we've got that in column E. Grant is 6, program 7, department's 8. And then for restriction, in my case, I want all of these rows to be unrestricted, which is code 1. I'm defaulting it. And you might ask yourself, well, how do you know that it's being defaulted? One difference is you'll notice that there's 2 commas if it's being defaulted. So I've got fund, comma, comma, 01, restriction, comma, comma, 1, whereas all the others have 1 comma, and then it references the column value over here. Okay, so keep that in mind. Again, update this for the segments that you have in your MIP database. Don't match what I have here because it probably won't work unless you have exactly the same segments I'm showing right here. All right, and then we get to debits and credits, the last 2 columns in our import. We've got column 9, column 10, and then the rest of these commas reference formatting types and whatnot, rounding. So typically, I always set it up the way I have it here. You're going to see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commas and then a 0. And debits are going to be separate from credits. If, I've seen some cases where debits and credits might be positive and negative values all in the same column, in which case you could use the same column here, like they both could be 9 or they both could be 10. You just want to know which is going to be defined as a positive and negative value based on the account type. If it's an expense, it's going to have a normal debit value, which would be a positive value. So keep that in mind. The remaining lines here in the transaction grid are all being ignored here in my payroll import. That's because these all refer to other types of imports and not so much my JV type. So this is all we need for our payroll import based on my example here. And now we're ready to test it and import it into my database. So when we come out here, let's go ahead and close my other tab that I have. Some of you might be familiar with the process. You come out here to File. There's an Import menu option. You'll click that first. And then It's going to look like a notepad file, but it's going to say def file wherever you have it saved. You want to make sure that it's saved in a place that the person who's supposed to import can access it. They'll select the definition file first, click open, and then you'll want to make sure, I always mention this, you'll want to make sure it's saved as a CSV file type. If you save it as a normal Excel file, which would be XLS or .xlsx, you're not going to see it because it must be in a CSV format. So once you have it saved like that, you can then select it. You'll notice at the bottom there's a little progress bar. It's going to run through. If it does freeze on you, that can be somewhat normal. Eventually it'll flicker and bring up either an error message or it'll flash like that and then be gone. So usually if it flashes, that's a good sign. That means it imported successfully. If it pops up a little window here, that means you got an error message. So let's go ahead and go into my journal vouchers. It pulled the session ID based on the next one in line. It pre-populated payroll import here. It populated the date that I had there. And then let's go ahead and look at the entry itself. There's our ID. And I think I must have had 1016 in there. And then now we'll look at the rows. So you'll notice balance sheet accounts, we've got a value assigned to fund, grant, and GL, program and department. Restriction isn't required for balance sheet accounts, so those are left blank. Our entry balances to the penny, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to import it, and then everything is good here. Now, what I want to show you here before moving on, let's go ahead and delete our session. I want to go ahead and change this date field to column 3 like we had it. Let's go ahead and save this. And then let's attempt to import that again. And that actually worked. So I didn't throw the error message like I expected, but what I was going to show you was, let's do this just so you can get a feel for what I was trying to demonstrate. Basically, I'm going to tell the file to ignore the grant segment. And when we attempt to import this again, I would expect an error message to pop up. All right, so what happens when it errors, it says, where do you want to save the error file? So I usually leave the name there, save it in the same location where my other files are saved. And then it brings up this message here. So this shows grant is required. Usually the messages are pretty user-friendly. It tells you what is needed. So in this case here, that tells me either my Excel file doesn't have, maybe it's missing a grant on one of the lines, or in this case, I have it turned off, so I would need to turn it back on. So that message is telling me that it's missing, but MIP needs it to import it successfully. So that one's pretty easy to troubleshoot. There are some others that are a little bit more difficult. So what I would say is if you're trying to do this on your own, you get snagged. We're pretty well versed in this, and we can help you out pretty quickly if you come across errors you can't resolve on your own. Okay, so I would say that basis can be used for all other imports. There's a few tweaks and whatnot that some imports use, pieces of information I should say, use on other imports and not so much the payroll one, but they're very similar, and you can always refer back to that product guide for help if need be as well. So again, long-winded there. I'll pause here before we go forward, see if there are any questions.
Luke, there is a question. We've got someone asking, is the bank reconciliation import PDF or Excel CSV based?
Yeah, good question. So typically we would recommend it to be in an Excel CSV format. Typically, some banks do export it to a text file. I would say PDF is not going to work, so you might need to see if they can export it to Excel or text.
Okay, and then we have a question. She has a question regarding the EFT module and the bank rec. The bank statement shows a lump sum, but MIP shows by vendor. Amy, if you could maybe type in some more information regarding that question. While she's doing that, we had one other question, and I got an email earlier today too about, you referenced the help menus or the manuals within MIP. You did it
Yes.
like right at the beginning. They're wondering if that's going to be taken away with the MIP support changes that are happening.
No, at least my understanding, I got that email too. The changes they're making, which go into effect this weekend, it's basically, I think, things they're resolving or fixing on the back end. So it's going to require you to log in, and they're going to provide login instructions. Everything else from a knowledge base support perspective, I think is staying the same. It's just a matter of how you log in. It's going to require a reset of your user ID and password.
Okay. Do you have time for, I've got one other question.
Yep.
We set up a warning for effective dates, and certain imports give us an error for those warnings. Is there a way to bypass that?
Yeah, so that's actually a good question too. So if you have your date entry table to say warn anybody if they're trying to post an entry that's maybe outside of the current month, then that will pop up the window that you saw there on my screen. I don't have it still up, but it would note that it's a warning. And so you could click OK and it's still going to import. So if it's a warning, I would just look at the verbiage on there. If it's a warning, it's still going to import. If it says error, that means the date falls outside of the other range and it is actually prohibited.
I have additional information from the question from Amy. Do you have time to handle that now, or do you want to wait till the end?
Sure, let's see what the additional detail is, and then it may take some further investigating.
Okay. The bank statement shows the total of all vendor payments for the day as one lump sum. If I import that into MIP, how will it know to match that lump sum total to the particular vendors listed in MIP?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the system's not going to know because you're going to need to have it broken out. Like the most basic example is like if you have an AP invoice that was, I should say AP check. Let's say check 123 paid whatever invoices. On the MIP side, it's going to show check 123. On your bank side, it would typically show check 123 clearing the bank, and that's how it would know. Okay, check the box that says 123. In your example there, you would have to have more information in your import file for that import to be effective. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes. Okay, that's it for questions for now.
Okay, thanks, Sherry. All right, I'm going to pull our slides back up here real quick. So we're going to go into our next topic, which is how does closing the fiscal year affect my balance sheet? And so many of you may be familiar with closing your fiscal year. Some organizations, and MIP is they don't necessarily need you to perform what I consider a hard close because for reporting purposes, it automatically closes it based on the dates that are used. So what I'm going to take you through here, and you can follow along in the slides. If you do perform a hard close, what does that mean for reports? So, and if this is a completely foreign topic, I'll kind of take you through start to finish. Let's say your fiscal year ended, you've had your audit, and you're ready to close the books in MIP so that no entries can be made, or you don't intend to make entries after that. You're going to come out here to Activities, Close Fiscal Year. And this is always a good reference to, if you just click that, doesn't mean it's going to start the process. It shows you the last time it was closed or the next fiscal year that is in line to close. So right now, my database, I still have 2023 open. I haven't performed a hard close on that. You know, if you do this in your database, it may show anything from the up to the current year, or it may show way back when you first started on MIP. You don't have to do this for the system to work as expected. It's not a hard requirement. If you do this, there are a few things that the system tells you want to make sure you do before you perform this. And some of these may apply depending on if you're using fixed assets, multi-currency. Some of you may not be. The biggest one that I would take away from this list is back up your database. If anything should happen in between you closing it or after you closing it, you always have a point in time that you can go back to, and you're not going to lose much information, if any. So always back up your database. If you're on the MIP cloud, they back up your database, so you don't have to worry about that step. If you have MIP installed on premise, you'll want to make sure you come out here to File, Backup, or your IT might even be doing this step for you. So make sure you do that. When you're ready to close the fiscal year, you'll click through these prompts, click OK, and it's going to go through and close that. Once it does, you'll notice that when you come out to Organization Information, this fiscal year end where mine shows 12/31/2023, that's going to update to whatever the next one in line might be. So why I'm showing you this is because this can always be a reference point as to what dates you need to use for reporting purposes, okay? Specifically your balance sheet. When I come out to reports, financial statements, balance sheet, if you all run reports quite often, you're familiar with these 4 dates. And so sometimes this first date here can be an odd date. You know, I've seen an organization who's been on MIP since 2004 and they haven't closed their fiscal year. This might be a 2004 date. Nothing wrong with that. That just means it's looking that far back to make sure you get a good starting point for your balance sheet. Okay? That's the whole key of this account balances begin. When you perform a hard close, this date changes, and so the starting point moves forward to the next year, typically. So if I go back here to mine is saying fiscal year end is 12/31/23. The beginning date would be 1/1/2023 because my organization here is calendar year. If you had a 6/30 fiscal year, this might be a July 1 date. Same concept. It's going to be the first day of the open year. All right, so that's the important part. The dates beneath that, those are important for the data that you're looking to provide in your report. I would say this one's always the most important. Account balances begin. As long as it's set, once you save it, you don't have to change it until the next time you perform a hard close. Okay? All right, so that is how your balance sheet might be affected after closing a fiscal year. All right, jumping back to the slides here real quick. I know we're coming down to the last 10 minutes here of our hour today. All right, how can I see the detail behind the values on my financial reports? And I've given you a screenshot in the slides there, but let me go out to, in this case, I'm going to look at a statement of revenues and expenditures. and I'm going to pick a board income statement, and then I'll go ahead and preview it on my screen. And then the icon I'm looking for, so you have your values here as they're expected, but then if you wanted to see the detail, for instance, like, okay, what makes up my salaries for my personnel costs? You could come up here to this drill icon, drill down, and it's going to open up a new window as I pull it over. You can then drill down into any one of those individual rows. So like I was saying, if I wanted to see salaries, I can click this little plus sign. It then expands based on the columns I saw there. I want to look at current year actual. And then it shows me the breakdown. In this case, I understand many of you may not want employees to have this access, which you can prohibit them from seeing. But if you wanted to see breakdown of employee salaries, here's your detail for the various entries that might have been loaded. So you can then take it a step further, and you can see the entry as it was coded into the system. So again, can show you a level of detail maybe you weren't aware of. So if I close this, that's going to be your drill icon at the top. This is only available on financial statements, I believe. So if you're looking for it on some other reports and don't see it, they don't have that added to every report in the system. For the sake of time, let's go ahead and jump to our last topic here, and then we can field questions. If you're looking for help and are stuck, MIP offers a few options. And again, like the question, this is changing a little bit. I think they're going to send you an email with login instructions here after the updates this weekend. My understanding is none of this is going to change. So in my slide, I've got a hyperlink so you can click each of these. Hopefully those links don't break with the update, but there's the product guides that I showed you for the data import and export. MIP knowledge base is very helpful. I reference this as well. If you have a certain topic or thing you're looking to do in the system, you might search for it, and it can sometimes give you step-by-step instructions if you're not familiar with the knowledge base. If you don't have access, you may need to create an account. Oops, let me jump back and go to the last one here. MIP customer community. This is an open forum, so MIP users are able to post questions, and then other users are able to help them and answer the questions on this community section here. So very helpful. An email can be sent each day with questions from other MIP users, and you can scan those. So they might apply to you, and you might, learn a tip that you weren't aware of based on other users' questions. So again, you might have to create an account for that as well, but the link here is at the bottom. And I'll pause here while we have just a couple minutes before I get to the last couple slides to see if we have any final questions.
We do have a couple questions. When you were talking about doing hard closes, we had one person ask if it's okay if they've never done or never do a hard close.
It is perfectly fine. Like I said, we have some clients that have been on the software for quite a while, and I'm going back here to the financial statement, the balance sheet. Here, you'll notice if I change that date, a year-end close will be simulated for this report here at the bottom. Some organizations might have that be 2004 because they've never performed a hard close. No harm in that. You just want to make sure that first date is the right date for your starting point. So I go back to this organization information. This fiscal year end will tell you what year is currently open. So no harm, just make sure you're using the right date.
That actually is part of the next question. If you go back to that screen you were on, he was asking why you write the current reporting year begins in 2023 rather than 2024.
Yeah, the system's not going to like that. So, I mean, like, let me change that back. And then if we did 2024, that's more of what it would look like. So if I'm looking to show values for this calendar year, you might have that. But then my last closed year would have been 2023 or prior to that. And so that's why I have this date be 2023.
Greg, if that doesn't answer your question, please provide us more detail. And that's it for questions. Amy says, thanks for sharing about the drill down. That's a great feature.
All right, perfect. So I'll bring up the slides here to close this out. MIP year-end training, we offer this each year. We'll cover 1099 processing, W-2 processing, and ACA. It'll be over the span of 3 hours. If one part applies to you over some of the others, you can pick and choose. So there you'll see on the screen, we're going to do that on December 11th. It's a Wednesday, 1 to 4 p.m., $99 per session. And then you will also receive a recording afterwards too. If you're able to attend or not, you'll receive that recording. So mark your calendars. I'll mention one more time, CPE credit. Anybody who wants to receive that, please email Leah here and just put in the subject line that it is CPE credit related. And we thank you all for joining us. It looks like we had a decent turnout here again today. So if you have any questions over MIP or want more information on any of our Sage products as well, feel free to email Adam or myself or give us a call. And we're always happy to help. Thank you once again for joining us on this MIP Lunch and Learn.